You're standing in a storage vault nobody opens. Metal shelving, concrete floor. That smell every archive has. Dust and something older than dust. One box shoved to the back. Label half peeled off, taped over again by someone who clearly meant to fix it and never did. It says, simply, unidentified. Inside is a skull. And the skull is wrong in a way that's hard to describe until you're holding it. Two brow ridges where there should be one. A jaw that looks like it belongs to a different face entirely, sitting just slightly out of alignment with the skull above it. One specimen, two sets of features that shouldn't exist on the same body. Here's the problem nobody at that museum wants to say out loud. They've never agreed on what this actually is. And the longer people study it, the less it looks like an accident, and the more it looks like something somebody tried to bury. So, is it fake? Is it real? Was somebody hiding a discovery or hiding a fraud? Hold on to that question. You're going to need it. Because there's a version of the story that already happened. In 1912, an amateur collector named Charles Dawson announced he'd found exactly this kind of thing in a gravel pit in Piltdown, England. A skull that mixed features no single species should have. A human-looking brain case, an ape-looking jaw, together presented as the missing link between us and everything before us. The scientific world lost its mind over it. For over 40 years, Piltdown Man sat in textbooks as one of the most important fossils on Earth. The proof, finally, that human brains evolved before human faces did. Here's the problem. It was never a fossil. It was a human skull and an orangutan's jaw. Filed down, stained to match, glued together by someone who understood exactly what scientists in 1912 wanted to find and gave it to them. It took until 1953, using a chemical dating method that measures how much fluorine a bone has absorbed from groundwater over time, basically a slow-motion sponge test, for researchers to prove the jaw and skull weren't even close to the same age. One had barely aged at all. Under a microscope, the teeth had been filed flat by hand. Whoever built it never got caught, officially. Theories have piled up for decades. Dawson himself is the leading suspect, and a 2016 forensic reanalysis of the specimens pointed to one person using one consistent method, which fits him best. But for a while, one popular theory even blamed the guy who invented Sherlock Holmes. Arthur Conan Doyle lived nearby, collected fossils, and, the theory goes, would have enjoyed fooling every scientist in England. Mostly dismissed now, but it tells you something about how deep this rabbit hole got. So maybe that's your vault skull. Maybe it's just Piltdown's cousin, another fake, another hoax, another reminder that people will lie about bones for fame. Except it isn't. And here's where it gets interesting. You can't fake this anymore. Not really. Because bone shape used to be all scientists had to go on, and shapes can be sculpted. DNA can't be. Not yet, anyway. And once researchers figured out how to pull genetic code out of bones tens of thousands of years old, an entire category of ancient mystery got a lot harder to lie about. The person most responsible for that leap is a geneticist named Svante Pääbo. In 2010, his team sequenced the first Neanderthal genome. That same year, using nothing but a single finger bone found in a Siberian cave, his lab identified an entirely new group of ancient humans nobody had ever known existed, the Denisovans, named after the cave. In 2022, Pääbo won the Nobel Prize for it. And it's that same lab, using that same cave, that found the closest thing to your vault skull that science has ever confirmed. Here's how. Denisova Cave has produced thousands of tiny broken bone fragments over the decades. Animal bone mostly, chewed and scattered and impossible to identify just by looking. So researchers started running them through a screening method called zooms, which checks the collagen protein in each fragment against a reference library, like a barcode scanner, sorting a mountain of unlabeled boxes until one of them pings back, human. In 2012, one fragment pinged. 2 centimeters long, unremarkable to the eye. It sat cataloged for years before anyone had the funding and technology to do a full genome sequence on something that small. In 2018, a researcher on Pääbo's team named Vivian Sloan finally ran it and got a result that made headlines worldwide. This wasn't a Neanderthal. It wasn't a Denisovan. It was both. As in, her mother was Neanderthal, her father was Denisovan. She was a first-generation hybrid, roughly 13 years old when she died 90,000 years ago. To this day, she's the only direct first-generation hybrid of two archaic human groups anyone has ever confirmed. Researchers nicknamed her Denny, and finding her wasn't just lucky. Statistically, it was absurd. First-generation hybrids don't stick around in the fossil record. Their genetic signature usually gets diluted within a few generations, smoothed out, harder to detect. Denny is the exception that got caught in the act, and she rewrote a basic assumption that Neanderthals and Denisovans lived apart, crossed paths rarely, interbred even less. Later analysis of an older Neanderthal genome from that same cave found Denisovan ancestry too, a separate, earlier hybridization event entirely. Which means this didn't happen once. It happened repeatedly, generation after generation, in the same patch of Siberia for tens of thousands of years. Now go back to your vaulted skull. The two brow ridges, the mismatched jaw. That's not Denny. Denny's just a bone fragment, no skull attached. But 8,000 kilometers away, in a cave in Romania, cavers found something closer to what's sitting in that crate. 2002, a cave system called Peștera cu Oase. Inside, two partial skulls, later named Oase 1 and Oase 2, roughly 40,000 years old. Oase 2's skull has a brow ridge you'd expect on a Neanderthal, thick, jutting, archaic. Oase 1's jaw has molars way too large for a modern human. But the rest of each skeleton, modern. Fully, unmistakably modern human. For over a decade, researchers debated what these individuals even were. Then in 2015, a team led by geneticist Kiame Fu sequenced Oase 1's genome and found something almost too clean. 6 to 9% Neanderthal DNA, more than almost any modern human alive carries, arranged in chunks so long, so unbroken by generations of reshuffling that the ancestry could only be explained one way. Somewhere between 4 and 6 generations back, one of Oase 1's direct ancestors was a Neanderthal, not a distant cousin from 50,000 years ago, a great-great-grandparent. Here's the twist nobody expects, though. That lineage seems to have gone nowhere. Genetic comparisons suggest Oase 1's population isn't a direct ancestor of the Europeans who came after. This particular hybrid family, as far as anyone can tell, didn't survive. A dead end. Genetically fascinating and completely irrelevant to who's alive today. Which tells you something important. Not every hybrid story ends in a legacy. Some just end. That's your vaulted skull, though, either way. Not a flawed, not a mistake. A person walking around 40,000 years ago, close enough to a Neanderthal ancestor that the DNA hadn't even had time to blend evenly yet. Nobody hid this, it just took modern genome sequencing, something Charles Dawson in 1912 couldn't have imagined in his wildest, most fraudulent dreams, to prove it was real. But here's the thing that should actually unsettle you. Humans weren't unique in this, not even close. Every time two closely related species ranges overlapped during the last ice age, every single time researchers have checked, you find evidence of the same thing happening. Hybridization wasn't the exception, it was the default setting. Take bison. If you've seen Ice Age cave art, the kind painted 20–30,000 years ago across sites like Lascaux and Chauvet in France, you've probably noticed the bison look inconsistent from panel to panel.
In 2016, genetics team led by Julien Soubriere ran ancient DNA analysis on more than 60 bison bones spanning 50,000 years and matched the genetic shifts generation by generation to the artistic ones. What they found? Modern European bison, the wisent, aren't a clean single origin species at all. They're a hybrid.
A cross between the extinct steppe bison and an ancient wild cattle lineage related to the aurochs, formed roughly 120,000 years ago. And, depending on the climate, warmer periods favoring one parent species traits, colder periods favoring the other, the hybrid population's appearance actually swung back and forth for tens of thousands of years. Longhorned, shorthorned, longhorn again.
The cave painters weren't sloppy or inconsistent. They were documenting a species' mid-identity crisis in real time, and they didn't even know it. Researchers nicknamed this ancestral hybrid the Higgs bison because, like the Higgs boson, everyone suspected it existed years before anyone actually found the evidence. The steppe bison itself didn't make it. That parent species is fully extinct now, gone by the end of the Ice Age. But its DNA didn't die with it. It's still out there, grazing in European nature reserves today, wearing a body built by two species instead of one. Mammoths did it too. In 2011, a research team sequencing a mammoth specimen from the Great Lakes region found something that shouldn't have been there. A Colombian mammoth, the huge, more southern species built for warmer plains, carrying the mitochondrial DNA signature of a woolly mammoth, the icon of the frozen north. Two mammoth species, usually kept apart by geography and climate, had overlapped somewhere in what's now the American Midwest and interbred, leaving hybrid offspring with a genetic passport that flatly didn't match their body type. Biologists call this kind of overlap a hybrid zone, a strip of land where two species' territories touch, mate, and blur, rather than one clean border between them. Wherever mammoth ranges brushed against each other for long enough, this is what you'd expect to find. And now, thanks to permafrost preserving genetic material for tens of thousands of years, that's exactly what turned up. Cave bears did it with brown bears, and this one has a twist worth sitting with. Cave bears went extinct around 24,000 years ago. Fully, completely extinct as a species, you will never see one alive, no matter how many centuries you wait. Except in 2018, a team led by Axel Barlow found something strange buried inside the genomes of living brown bears today. Fragments of cave bear DNA. Not a little either, enough to show that before cave bears vanished, they'd interbred with brown bears often enough that pieces of the extinct species survived, hiding essentially inside a species that didn't go extinct. Cave bears aren't fully gone. Part of them just moved in with the neighbors, and the neighbors never mentioned it. And polar bears, the animal you'd assume is the most genetically isolated, the most extreme, the least likely to blend with anything, did the exact same thing. In Alaska, there's a population of brown bears living on 3 islands, nicknamed the ABC Islands, whose DNA doesn't look like other brown bears at all. It looks like polar bears. Genetic studies going back to the 1990s, refined through the 2010s, trace this to ancient hybridization. The two species ranges colliding as ice sheets expanded and retreated, leaving a population of brown bears that are genetically part polar bear. And it's still happening. Wildlife biologists have documented modern hybrid bears in the wild, nicknamed Pisleys or Growler bears, as warming Arctic ice keeps pushing polar bears further south into brown bear territory. The ancient story and the current one are, quietly, the same story. Quick myth-busting detour, because you've probably seen the photos. Dire wolves. In 2021, a genomic study led by paleogeneticist Angela Perry found that dire wolves, the huge Ice Age predators everyone assumed were just oversized gray wolves, actually split off from the wolf family tree over 5 million years ago. They were never close enough genetically to interbreed with gray wolves or coyotes at all. No hybrid zone, no crossover, nothing. Which makes the viral 2025 headlines about a biotech company bringing back dire wolf pups a little misleading. What they actually made were gray wolves with roughly 20 genes edited to look the part. Impressive genetic engineering. Not a resurrected hybrid, and not even really a dire wolf. Sometimes the myth is the whole story, and the DNA just says no. There's an even stranger version of this happening in humans, and it doesn't need a skull at all. Look closely at certain West African populations today, and geneticists find DNA segments that don't match any known human group, living or extinct. No measured skeleton, no discovered cave, nothing sitting in a museum drawer anywhere. Just a statistical shadow inside living genomes making up roughly 2 to 19% of some individuals' ancestry, depending on the population and the study. Researchers call it ghost archaic introgression, evidence of an entire hominin lineage that vanished so completely that no fossil has ever confirmed it existed. Not covered up, not misplaced in a vault somewhere, just gone. except for the part of it still walking around today inside people who have no idea they're carrying it. So here's the pattern, and it's a pattern, not a coincidence. Humans and Neanderthals. Neanderthals and Denisovans. An unnamed ghost lineage and living Africans with no body ever found. Steppe bison and aurochs. Woolly and Columbian mammoths. Cave bears and brown bears. Polar bears and brown bears. 7 confirmed examples across the animal kingdom, plus 1 famous non-example that proves the rule by breaking it. Same story, over and over, everywhere the fossil record or the genome has been checked closely enough to see it. Why? Think a species range like software running on specific hardware built for one environment, optimized for one set of conditions. An ice age doesn't ask permission before it changes the hardware. Glaciers advance, coastlines vanish. Grasslands turn to tundra in a few thousand years, which sounds slow when you remember species had been separated for 100,000. Habitats that kept 2 related species apart suddenly overlap because the only livable strip of land left is one they now have to share. Hybridization from that angle isn't romantic, it's a survival strategy dressed up as an accident. This is also why so many of these hybrids stayed hidden for so long. Bones don't come with a genome printed on the label. For most of the 20th century, all scientists had were shapes, skull curves, jaw sizes, teeth counts. And shapes lie. They lied about Piltdown because a forger exploited exactly what shape-based science couldn't check. And ironically, shapes almost lied about Oase and Denny too in the opposite direction. Real hybrids that looked off enough that some early researchers suspected contamination or misclassification before the DNA proved otherwise. It wasn't a cover-up, it was a toolset finally catching up to a truth that had been sitting in drawers, in crates, in cave floors for tens of thousands of years, waiting for someone with the right microscope. So, back to the vault. There isn't just one skull like the one you started with. There are dozens scattered across museum basements and cave systems on 4 continents, still being re-examined as sequencing gets cheaper and faster every year. Some will turn out to be exactly what they look like. A few, statistically, are probably still frauds nobody's caught yet. But most are going to turn out to be real, because we already know how common this was. We are, several of us, living proof of it. If you're not of primarily sub-Saharan African descent, somewhere between 1 and 4% of your own DNA is Neanderthal right now, in every cell. Some populations carry Denisovan DNA too, inherited the same way Denny got half of hers, through ancestors who didn't see 2 different species standing across the fire from them. They just saw someone else standing in the same shrinking patch of world and decided that was enough. Next time you catch your own reflection in a window, phone screen, whatever's nearby, that's worth sitting with for a second. Not a metaphor, an inheritance. Somewhere back down the line, one of your ancestors looked at someone who wasn't quite the same species and didn't turn away. Multiply that decision by every overlapping range, every retreating glacier, every species pushed onto the same shrinking strip of land for 100,000 years, and you stop seeing the vault skull as an anomaly. You start seeing it as ordinary, predictable even. The expected outcome of what happens when the world changes faster than a species boundary can hold. Nobody hid that skull in the vault. History just took its time proving it was telling the truth.